there's music and there's people who are young and alive. Driving in your car, please don't drop me home, because I haven't got one anymore. Take me out tonight, because I want to see people and I want to see lights. Driving in your car, oh please don't drop me home, because it's not my home, it's their home, and I'm welcome no more.
20 years ago, a band formed in Manchester. Drums, bass, guitar and vocals. Nothing unusual about that. They were only together for 5 years, but between 1982 and 1987, Stephen Morrissey, Johnny Marr, Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce inspired a devotion unseen before or since. A band to live for, almost to die for. The most important band of the last 50 years, some said. We'll see.
Take me out tonight. Oh, take me anywhere. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. And in the darkened underpass, I thought, oh God, my chance has come at last. But then a strange fear gripped me and I just couldn't ask. Take me out tonight. Oh, take me anywhere. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. Driving in your car, I never want to go home, because I haven't got one. Going to go, I haven't got one.
Stephen Patrick Morrissey was born in Davyhulme in West Manchester in May 1959 of Irish parents. His early years were spent in Hume and Moss Side before the Morrisseys moved to King's Road, Stretford, just south of the city centre in 1969. He attended St Mary's Secondary Modern. His writing ambitions began here, penning storylines for Coronation Street that he sent to the programme makers. The tough regime at St Mary's was also to inspire some of Morrissey's most bitter lyrics.
Well, in my early years at the school, I was teaching a variety of subjects because of a shortage of staff, and I did teach Stephen English. I was aware of him then because he was quite a sensitive pupil.
St Mary's was, you know, a tough school, and it was more than tough. And I think when I'd heard the Headmaster Ritual, which was on the first track on Meaty's Murder, which was, you know, a brutal indictment of his school days, for instance, and I remember finding an inspectorate report on the school, and it said there were 92 instances of corporal punishment within a term or something, which was, you know, scarcely warranted.
He wouldn't have been at the end of any of members of staff aggression, I don't think. He might have felt that he wasn't appreciated for his, what I call his sensitivity anyway. I think maybe some of the male members thought he was a bit effeminate, you know.
Because the years previous to the Smiths were quite dank for me, I could see this as my absolutely, perhaps sole key opportunity to do something constructive and to do something worthwhile.
Well, Morrissey was always a strange creature, even from his teenage years. He was in many ways a pop star in waiting, but albeit a very frustrated one. I mean, he used to write endless letters to the music press, and they're all there for archivists to see to this day if they choose to look.
Inspired by the New York Dolls and seeing the Sex Pistols at Manchester's Lesser Free Trade Hall in 1976, he flirted with the local punk scene. By 1978, he'd already played in bands like the Nosebleeds and Slaughter and the Dogs.
I thought Morrissey was incredibly talented as a lyric writer, but then he was very introverted. He was this shy man who, you know, you'd have to prise him out of his shell. He didn't have a lot to say. I mean, there's a lot going on upstairs, obviously. Being exposed to Morrissey at his early stage before he blossomed to what he is today, you know, was interesting too.
Johnny Marr was from Ardwick, 4 years younger than Morrissey, but also of Irish stock. His musical ambition started early. playing with teenage guitar bands like White Dice and the Paris Valentinos. These bands featured future Smith Andy Rourke and future bin man turned Weatherfield councillor Kevin Kennedy.
To be honest, I mean, it was a privilege really to see that germ of genius in Johnny's bedroom, where he played this really knackered, it looked like a Fender Strat copy, and he was really into Rory Gallagher, so he got this Fender Strat and he stripped it of all the paint, so he's down to the wood. And I watched Johnny play then, you know, and I thought, wow, this guy is going to be brilliant, because I still think he's probably the most melodic guitarist I've ever seen, and I think he's probably one of the best in the world.
I'd say my style is influenced by basically American and English folk guitar. I just take it and sort of try it a little bit more aggressively and go. It
was a great band. We had like harmonies and keyboards, and we only ever did we did one gig at a place called The Squat on Oxford Road. It's like part of the university, you know. But, yeah, I mean, yeah, good times, exciting times.
Morrissey was aware of Ma, and vice versa, but they didn't actually meet until the summer of 1982.
It just suddenly happened, which sounds almost unbelievable, but it really did. It really did happen in a very sudden, very casual way. The meetings between the group members was very accidental, almost. And it was also at a very barren time in 1982 when everybody seemed to be lost and the vile elements were taking over.
Morrissey and Ma finally got together in the bedroom of Morrissey's house at Kings Road in Stretford. The rapport was instant, and within 24 hours they'd written their first song, Suffer Little Children. Slowly, a band lineup came together, and so did a name. The Smiths family and Smithdom were rejected in favour of simply the Smiths.
The original lineup of the Smiths, I suppose, if you considered it a lineup, would have been when they recorded their first demos, when they recorded Suffer Little Children and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. They brought in a bassist named Dale Hibbert, who was at the studio at the time, and so he was appointed bassist.
And in the early days, there was a possibility that we were going to be a gay band. All the time, all they were saying, well, what happened was, when I originally started, I got carted off, given some clothes, these are your clothes, taken to a hairdresser's, this is your haircut, and they said, well, we're probably going to have an image as a gay band, and it didn't really fit in with the fact that I was married with kids at the time.
Come on, Pete!
By the autumn of 1982, the Smiths had their first gig booked at Manchester's Ritz Club, but no permanent drummer. Enter another Irish Mancunian, Mike Joyce.
Well, it came around by mistake, really, because a mutual friend of Johnny Marr's, a lad called Pete Hope, I used to live with him in a flat in Cholton, and he told me that this lad, Johnny, was looking for a drummer in this band, and so it just happened by mistake, really. And then when I went down to well, I mean, kind of audition, I suppose. Went down there, and Johnny was there, and Morrissey, and Dale, the original bass player. And I had a play, and really enjoyed it, because I think the musicality was something that had passed me by in the other groups. Although the other groups weren't just, you know, complete thrash. this musically, I think Johnny's subtlety and his texture when playing guitar was radically different than other players that I'd worked with up until that point.
Well, behind me we have the Ritz, which is a huge ballroom, and it was the venue for the Smiths' first performance on the 4th of October 1982. It wasn't the classic lineup that we remember. Andy Rourke hadn't joined by this stage, and there was the curious guy called James Maker, who was wearing stiletto shoes, a suit, and shaking his maracas, a sort of a transvestite Bez.
To this day, James Maker claims that he never wore high heels on stage at the Ritz. He says they were smart court shoes.
I remember him coming on and introducing us, I think, in French. That's the only time I ever met him. I never really met him before that or after that. I was told he was a friend of Stephen's, and that was it. That was all I was told about him. But again, yeah, he seemed, I don't know. I don't think, slightly pretentious, I think.
Morrissey certainly didn't want the focus to be on anybody else but him, and James Maker wasn't used again. I don't know how seriously James Maker was ever considered to be part of the group. I think he was just invited along by Morrissey, presumably to add a bit of visual flair and moral support or whatever else. I never thought that he was ever considered to be an actual member of the group or even a serious adjunct to the group. I think he was just there.
James Maker was never a long-term proposition, and neither was family man Dale Hibbert.
The fact that I was married, I had kids, and I couldn't fit in with the image that was being prepared for the Smiths. There was definitely an image being nurtured, and I think it suddenly clicked that, oh, there's a bit of an odd one out. I believe that was the reason more than anything else.
So Johnny Marr turned to his former White Dice bandmate Andy Rourke to join the Smiths.
I mean, we were that kind of cocksure about what we were doing, and that we actually thought that, you know, we deserved it, and you know, maybe we did. I don't know, but we were. I think, you know, you have to believe in what you're doing, and we really did. You know, we were all really passionate about it, and I think that's probably what made it work a lot quicker than it would have done otherwise. But yeah, I mean, within kind of 6 months we were doing Top of the Pops, and a bit bizarre.
By spring 1983, just months after forming, the Smiths had agreed a one-off deal to release their first single through the independent Rough Trade Records.
And in love, we can go wherever we please, and everything depends upon how near you stand to me.
They'd also been invited to record a session for the hugely influential John Peel Show on Radio 1.
The very things that excited us about the Smiths when they first appeared, just their sense of otherness and kind of completeness, and the fact that they arrived almost as like beings from another planet. I mean, not in that they were all that weird to look at or anything, although there are people who would have argued that, but it was just the fact that they'd suddenly arrived, and that you think, where the hell did this come from?
Those recordings that they did for the BBC were fantastic. I mean, a lot of people prefer them to the actual recordings that they did on their first album. I mean, a lot of people have great affection for the stuff that's on Hatful of Hollow, for instance, and it was very important. I think it brought the Smiths into the student hinterland. People forget how many people actually listened to Radio 1 in those days, and how important and influential that John Peel Show was. I mean, people religiously listened to it, you know, every day. I mean, we didn't have so much. I mean, MTV was just starting at the time. There wasn't that many outlets for pop music on radio or TV when you look back, and Peel was crucial.
The technology exists now and has been developed over the last 20 years to make almost anybody sound okay, which is disappointing in a way, because you no longer get amusingly awful demos from people, or people who are plainly mad, because they can do something that sounds sort of okay. But with the sessions, they're a more natural, more live thing, obviously, and that's what I like, really.
John Peel, bless him, he picked up on it really early on, and really pushed us to the fore, really, and promoted us really well. We did untold Peel sessions. It seemed like we were doing them every other week. But, I I mean, a lot of that appeared on Hatful of Hollow, a lot of the Peel sessions. And they were kind of rushed, you know, you do like 4 songs in 30 minutes or something like that, and they have to be mixed as well. But, so, you know, there's a few mistakes in there and stuff, but I think fans, you know, kind of like to hear like the warts and all versions sometimes.
The stir created by the sessions resulted in a flurry of interest from major record labels, but the Smiths stuck with the tiny rough trade. When the deal was signed, only the signatures of Morrissey and Johnny Marr appeared on the contract. In the eyes of the law, they were the Smiths.
Were Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce Smiths or hired hands? Well, they certainly thought they were Smiths. I think contractually they weren't. But it's silly to say they weren't Smiths because their names are on the back of every single album that the Smiths did. I don't think they were particularly bothered. I mean, they stayed the distance. They were there at the beginning, they were there at the end, and, you know, they were Smiths for 5 years, so they certainly were not just hired hands. And certainly there were none of the fans, none of the media ever suggested that they were anything but 100% bona fide Smiths.
I was there. Played on the tracks, played at the gigs. That's all I really needed to know.
But by now it was the band's lyrics, not its business dealings, that were causing concern. Claims that the Smiths were celebrating child molesting had crossed from the music press over to the tabloids.
There were songs such as The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Reel Around the Fountain, and Handsome Devil, which had, you know, very suggestive lines in them and very strong sexual undertones as well. And it was easy to, you know, interpret them as being dubious in some respects.
Reel Around the Fountain, that was condoned for being about paedophilia, but I mean, only if you take the word child at its absolute base, literal level, you know, then could you read something into it. And I think that, again, that was largely like you know, a stick created by the tabloids to kind of like, you know, how can we kind of, what can we do about this band or this man with these dangerous views? I think that was a kind of a thing used in a way to kind of beat him down.
I mean, they kind of got it wrong, calling us like paedophiles and stuff like that. And that was a bit of a scary time because it happened quite early on.
The paedophile row may have helped prevent Hand in Glove reaching the charts, but their next single cracked the top 30. This charming man reached number 25 in the charts, earning the Smiths their first ever appearance on Top of the Pops.
It's my service crushing that someone so handsome should care.
On the same show, it was either Spandau Ballet or Paul Young's band, and the guitarist had to walk through the door sideways to get his shoulder pads through, you know, it's like, coming through. And massive haircuts, and yeah. So I think it kind of stood the test of time a bit. It's a lot easier to watch on telly than if we would have had, you know, John Collins shoulder pads and stuff. I couldn't get them in my size anyway.
I would go out tonight, but I haven't got the sticks to wear.
Musically, we were brilliant. I like to think so anyway. Some people thought we were shit. I don't. I thought we were great. It's a lovers or loathers, which I'd much rather have than polite acceptance of, well, yeah, they're there. I don't like them. Oh, I do. Oh, right. I like that kind of anger of, you know, of being on our side, and if you're not, then bye-bye.
We have an album released on February the 20th, and I really do expect the highest critical praise for it. It's a very, very good album. I think it's a signal post, really, in music.
Do you think that by making sort of statements like that, people are going to start calling you really arrogant? You know?
Yes, I do, but, you know, if you really have something and you're very sure of it, why hide? I don't understand that attitude.
The thing I loved about it was that Morrissey kind of appreciated the absurdity of the situation, totally. Like, he really understood the fact that... So he provoked people to either love him or hate him.
I decree today that life is simply taking and not giving. England is mine.
and it owes me a living.
I mean, it was difficult for them. They were on a small label anyway. There was limited promotion. But even when they broke through, because of the nature of the business then, you know, if they got into the top 10, they were doing well. They always seemed to peak about number 8 or number 9, and that was it. They couldn't make that final breakthrough.
Not dissing Rough Trade. I mean, they're a small independent company. If it was EMI, things would have been a lot different, I'm sure. But I think that's mainly the reason. But also it means that it was still a kind of Smithdom, you know, it was our family, and it's nice to have hit records, of course it is. And you'd be a liar if you're in a band and you didn't say it wasn't, you know, you didn't look at the chart after your single had gone in or whatever to see if it had gone up. But for me personally, especially after the first couple of singles that I'd done well, it was exciting, but there was an overall picture really of what we were doing, and that was creating great music.
Sales may not have been growing, but the band's confidence was. They even appeared on Top of the Pops without Morrissey. His 60s heroine, Sandy Shaw, took over the lead vocals and writhed her way through a revamped version of failed first single, Hand in Glove.
I remember feeling incredibly awkward because I know I felt good, but I didn't know how to, I just didn't know how to be. I'd never been on stage at that point with a band. It was always me and maybe an orchestra or a band tucked behind curtains or whatever. When I heard the music, I thought, oh God, and I just didn't get it. I really didn't get it. The first time he came on his own to the flat, I think he was early, and I was obviously anxious, and I was late, and I was still in my pyjamas. I think I must have let him down somewhat, or maybe I didn't. Well, I hadn't worked for a long time. I had a huge break where I'd kind of disappeared, so it was like a great experience for me anyway. But it was kind of, it's like the band I'd always wanted to play with.
I think it was the material as much as anything. I don't think the Smiths ever produced a commercial enough single that would hit the #1 spot.
But in 1985, the band did reach #1 with the album Meat is Murder.
They decided they wanted to do it back up in the north of England, and at the time I don't believe there was a studio in Manchester they wanted to use, so we ended up using this studio which was called Amazon Studios, which was in Kirby, I think, just outside Liverpool, and they didn't want to stay there, obviously, so we had this old clapped out white Mercedes that we drove up and down the motorway from Manchester to Liverpool every day, and I think we lived on packets of cheese and onion crisps and chocolate bars and things for that, for the weeks we were making the record. Quite an unhealthy diet, really. But obviously there was no meat being passed around.
He was commenting on Margaret Thatcher, on the Brighton bombing, on Band-Aid, on animal rights. All these were fairly contentious issues, and you know, Morrissey was not understated when he talked about them, and he was quite brutal.
I feel that if popular singers don't say these things, who does? We can't have any faith in playwrights anymore. We can't have any faith in film stars. Young people don't care about those things. They're dying arts. And if you say, what right do you have? The implication there, to me, is that, you know, popular music is quite a low art. It should be hidden. It can be there, but let's not say anything terribly important. Let's just, you know, make disco records or whatever. So I really feel that we do have an obligation, and I know that people respect it and they want it, and it's working to great effect.
As the success increased, so did the excess. The band's backstage demands were becoming increasingly bizarre. It started with flowers and ended with Morrissey insisting on a live tree backstage. No less than 3 feet high, but no more than 5 feet.
And it was like, where could you go from flowers? I suppose that was the only way was up. So it was a tree. I mean, it was a small tree, and it was one tour, I think. And I think we got a tree every time. I mean, you know, we're talking like a bay tree or something like that. You know, we're not talking sort of a 300-year oak here.
But that's not like saying take all the red Smarties out of a Smartie box, is it? I mean, that's not being pedantic or daft. I mean, that's, and also I think we had to cut off the thorns as well on some of the branches as well.
So the poor old road manager used to have to take this mini saw along with him and do the business until it was to Morrissey's specifications.
It got a bit, what's the word, ludicrous in the end.
He'd waited so long to be a star, Morrissey, and he'd obviously, you know, he'd had those fantasies of what he was going to do. And there was a stage at which, if Morrissey said, you know, he wanted a green dwarf, we would have got a green dwarf. You know, there was a stage when whatever he asked for, we would have got together. You know, it was so much fun.
Fated by the critics, fawned over by the fans, and with America beckoning, nothing could stop the Smiths, except perhaps the Smiths themselves.
All that we did of the US before we split up, and it was in Toronto, I think it was. We'd come off and there was a lot of prefabricated buildings around there, and I was bursting for a pee. So I had a quick pee behind this little kind of outbuilding thing, and the crowd started chanting Smiths, 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 and there was about 14,000 there, and I started to think, whoa, this is us, this is just us lot, you know, lad from Stretford, lad from Hardwick, and you know, 2 lads from Bagley, and it was just wow.
By 1986, the Smiths were ready to release what was to become their most celebrated album, The Queen is Dead.
I mean, making The Queen is Dead was, you know, again, that was quite a patchy affair because that wasn't really done in one session, that album, again, because they were so busy. We were doing sessions here, there and everywhere, whenever they could fit it in between their touring schedule.
I think the reason why people dwell on The Queen is Dead is because of the nostalgic memories of that year, 1986, and the tour they did.
We celebrate, girls, we celebrate!
She's got your bottle of wine. No, Johnny's, look, that girl.
The best bands are always the bands that have a kind of a world around them. You know, a world that when you go and see them on stage, you don't necessarily want to get to know them, but you just want to watch sort of that world for, you know, an hour or whatever you get to watch it for. And they were definitely a band like that. And I think they knew that. I think before, you know, they started the band, I think Morrissey had an idea, obviously because he was in bands like the New York Dolls and things, which are totally the same sort of thing about having a world around them, you know, like you couldn't join it, but you could just watch it.
The Smiths were doing what no other band had done since the Beatles with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. They were creating a musical map of their hometown through their songs. Manchester had so much to answer for.
This is the Iron Bridge, and we're here in Stretford. Now, the song Still Ill contains the lyric, "Under the Iron Bridge we kissed." Morrissey was a regular user of this bridge because he actually lived on King's Road in Stretford, which is at the far end of the bridge. And the reason he came over here is because this brand new housing estate was the site of his school, which was St Mary's. And that school also inspired the song The Headmaster Ritual. This is Southern Cemetery in Chorlton, and it was here in the early 80s that Morrissey and a close friend of his, Linda Sterling, spent dreaded sunny days wandering around the cemetery together, and that ultimately inspired the song Cemetery Gates. There's Strange Ways Here We Come, which was the 4th album. There's the song Rusholme Ruffians, of course. The song Miserable Lie contains What Do I Get for My Trouble and Pains, a rented room in Whalley Range. So clearly the districts around Manchester were, you know, certainly inspiring the songs written by Morrissey. You can't remove Manchester from the Smiths as if they couldn't have been formed anywhere else. You know, the lyrics that Morrissey was writing was particular to his experiences of growing up, and he used those as an influence for his lyrics.
It should have been the best of times for the band, but they'd become embroiled in legal rows with Rough Trade Records. Johnny Marr was seriously overworked. And Andy Rourke had acquired a habit that was at odds with the Smiths' aesthetic anti-rock and roll image.
Morrissey always had an anti-drugs policy in the Smiths. I mean, you know, he was a guy that was telling the world he was celibate, that he didn't drink much, if at all, and he certainly didn't take any drugs. And he wanted to get away from that cliched notion of what rock groups were all about. And on the other hand, there were certain elements within the Smiths that kind of liked that aspect of rock culture, if you will. And, you know, and of course, yeah, and it's well publicised, Andy Rourke had his heroin habit, and that flew in the face of everything that Morrissey represented.
I don't know, I mean, I think everybody had kind of had enough with it. And, you know, me included. But I don't really want to go. Okay. I don't want to delve too far into it, really. It's too painful.
The solution was to sack Andy Rourke. His replacement was Craig Gannon.
I was not a fan before I joined the band, but I knew sort of what they were about. So it was surprisingly easy, really. Everyone made me feel really welcome. Everyone was really nice to me. Just made me feel at home, so just had a few rehearsals, me and Johnny mainly. Just learning the guitar parts. Just took it easy and didn't really think about it. Just got on with it, really.
When Andy Rourke was well enough to return, Gannon was kept on as a second guitarist. And for a while, the Smiths were a five-piece band. Hang on a minute, who's that lad? It's a six-piece band.
Burn down the disco, hang the blessed DJ.
But it wasn't to last.
I don't know, I've no idea, really. I think it's just, we just didn't like each other. We'd just be in the same room and it was just a nightmare. It was just a horrible atmosphere, really frosty. So the first thing you want to do is just walk out, really. Just little things, like I remember we were all having our dinner in some service station and we're there eating away, and then somebody says, oh, we've got to go now, so everyone legs it, and I'm there still eating, you know, and what do I do? Everyone's gone on the bus, so I pick up my sandwich and get on the bus, and Johnny walks past me and goes, that's disgusting, walks to the back of the bus in a mood. And I thought, you know, that's just an excuse to be nasty, really.
Gannon became the first Smith to take legal action against Morrissey and Marr, but not the last. By 1987, the Smiths were receiving the unusual accolade of a South Bank Show documentary about their career, just as their career was about to end.
Every so often, a pop singer or group springs up which is not only good of its kind, but seems to epitomise its time and place. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and so to the Smiths. Formed in Manchester in 1982, disbanded in London a few weeks ago.
It was one of the messiest splits on record. To this day, it seems the Smiths disbanded in August 1987 because of a series of misunderstandings.
Yeah, I suppose the Smiths breakup was very sad and also a comedy of errors or a tragedy of errors, depending on your point of view.
That bizarre sequence, which, you know, if you could just go back now and just stop there and say, OK, this is where we could sort it out, you know, and Johnny went off to LA to do something.
He went on holiday, and while he was away, somebody, we don't know who, leaked something to the enemy saying that Johnny had left.
I don't know where that story came from. I don't know if it was Morrissey preempting what he thought was was someone jumping ship, which Johnny most certainly wasn't at that point. I mean, the thing that pushed Johnny into leaving was that article.
So Johnny gets back on his holidays and there's a massive piece in the enemy saying Johnny Marr's left the Smiths, and that was like the first he'd heard of it, but I think he was that pissed off about it and where it might have come from that he said, right, you know, I've had enough anyway, and yeah, I have left. So that was that.
I'd like to think it's because, in reality, whether what anybody says, it's maybe because it run its course. It had a beginning, a middle and an end.
With the Smiths on another level, I really do think it is true. I think this is really more or less the end of the story.
But fame is a bastard, really. It is, because it just messes people up so much.
First, Johnny Marr leaves. Then the others try to carry on. Then Mike Joyce quits. And finally, Morrissey and Andy Rourke decide to call it a day. 2 weeks later, their final album, Strange Ways, Here We Come, was released.
And I think the reason why Strange Ways Here We Come suffers is because they never played any of it live. People didn't get a chance to kind of invest in it or reciprocate the kind of songs in a kind of audience environment. So it's kind of like Strange Ways Here We Come it's kind of sort of frozen in time in a way. It's never really been allowed to kind of like live the way that the others have done.
A lot of people feel that when we were making the last album, Strange Ways, that the band were breaking up. It wasn't true at all. The band were very happy. I was very settled with them. We were making our third album together. Everything was going great. The only thing that was really happening in the background was that there was an American manager, Ken Friedman, who I could tell Morrissey wasn't really that sure about being involved anymore. I'm not sure he really wanted Ken, whereas I think Johnny did want someone to come in and help take some of the pressure off of his shoulders, because I think Johnny was involved in kind of some of the day-to-day running of all the background things. So the session itself went very well. When I heard a few weeks later from Jeff Travis that Johnny had walked out and the band had split up, I just thought, it's just a little argument, you know, they just need to get away from each other for a while, and within a short period of time it'll all be settled.
It would be nearly 9 years until all four Smiths were to be in the same room again. As sole songwriters, Morrissey and Marr were entitled to all royalties from the songs they wrote together in the Smiths. But although Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke had played on all the Smiths records and played live for 5 years, they received 10% of the income for performing the songs, not 25%. Morrissey and Marr contested this, saying their fellow Smiths were always aware of the 10% agreement. This was the basis of the case which finally went to the High Court in 1996. But as the pair were waiting for the case to be heard, Andy Rourke lost heart.
Craig Gannon settled and took £44,000 and went on his merry way. Andy Rourke, I think, was either on income support after the Smiths and, you know, was having tough times, and I don't think his heart was in for a long battle, which it was obviously going to inevitably become.
When we split up, I wasn't paid for 2 years, and I was more or less destitute, and then I was dangled a carrot of 80 grand or whatever, and when you're on your arse, then that seems like a lot of money. I just got married and had a mortgage, and so I had to take it.
Did that cause any problems with Mike?
Yeah, it did for a while. I mean, when I was getting married, Mike was supposed to be my best man, and he was that kind of angry about it. He wouldn't do it. And we didn't speak for about 2 years, but now, you know, we're best buddies. And
it was left to Mike Joyce to continue the fight.
Silence in court!
I thought it was better than any reunion gig. I thought, to me, I was fascinated by the court case. I thought it was wonderful. It was highly dramatic, hugely entertaining, and absolutely riveting. To see Morrissey, and indeed Marr, in the witness box, particularly Morrissey in the witness box, was unbelievable.
There were certain things that were said that were a bit, oh, right, okay. But if that was the case, then that was the case. It's not something that really, it did affect me for a little while because I just wanted it over with. And I'm sure I can speak for everybody concerned on both sides. You know, it's not something pleasant to have to go through. But it's that there are, you know, certain things that are said that are upsetting for everybody. But it's such a surreal, kind of unnatural situation, because when I was banging my mum's settee at home before I got my first drum kit, wanting to be in a band, you just, not in your wildest dreams, your worst nightmare, should I say, do you think that you're going to be in the High Court in London with the band members?
I remember the break. There was a break because he was so frazzled by it. I mean, the judge asked him, "Do you need a break, Mr. Morris?" And he said, "I think I do. He'd been on the stand for several hours by this stage. And he went outside, and I'd gone outside, and it was just me and him together. And he came up to me and he said, "So, this is where it all ends."
The drummer with the legendary Manchester band The Smiths has won a High Court battle for £1 million of the group's profits. Mike Joyce claimed he was entitled to a quarter of the band's earnings during the 1980s. Lead singer Morrissey and guitarist Johnny Marr fought the case, insisting they were the Smiths' dominant figures.
Judge John Weeks' comments about Morrissey in his summing up took the singer and the court by surprise.
The judge had said of Morrissey that he was devious, truculent and unreliable, and those are the three words that really made the headlines afterwards. And I know Morrissey was appalled by that.
Finally, it seemed the Smiths' legal affairs were a closed book. He is back in Britain to play 2 nights at the Royal Albert Hall in London, England. Morrissey hasn't played in the UK for 3 years. He hasn't released a record in 5, but still the faithful turn out. The former darling of the music press now rarely speaks in public.
It's a pity for Morrissey, you know, that, but it's up to him. If he wants to, you know, be remote and isolated and whatever, then that's what he must do. But he seems in that instant to also stop being kind of amusing, or indeed some people would argue any good.
I think regardless of what anyone says about Morrissey, I think you see Morrissey live now, and it'll be a very unique live experience. I think the kind of audience he attracts is still that kind of almost, you know, people say semi-religious, but I suppose in a way it's the easiest way to describe it. You know, he's still a very charismatic performer.
I saw him quite recently, and it was just kind of absurd in a way to watch, like, the way that all these people in the audience are probably like bankers and like head of, like, you know, corporations, just dressed up in their quiffs and their shirts, just going, you know, crying. It's just to have that effect. What is he now, 44 years old? For a 44-year-old man to walk on stage and make sort of 5,000 men cry, it's just, it's just, I don't know, it's still kind of some weird kind of phenomenon.
Morrissey. He's just so out on his own. He never fails to swarm people in. It's beautiful.
And he's goddamn gorgeous, and it's good to see him back in England.
People want to know what he's really like, and he never lets on. And everything that we need is there in the music.
With all the manufactured music going on today, you can still see he's relevant. He's sarcastic and sardonic as ever, and totally needed.
Did I enjoy it? I had a good night out, you know. It wasn't the Smiths, was it? But it was an all right night out, you know. It's sort of just about your money's worth, but not the Smiths.
But there's one place that Morrissey is still treated with the adulation he deserves: America.
I think, to be really honest with you, I'm very surprised he settled in America. But I can understand he likes attention, he likes to be loved, and I think it's probably over here everything moved on, and he realised that he didn't have that same following perhaps as he was still receiving in pockets of America. I mean, America's a huge place, and you know, I think it's the West Coast is where he's happiest, because that's where he's got a huge, you know, fan base still.
Good night, Morrissey. See you soon. Don't wait up. But if you do, I might make it worth your while. You fresh thing! I saw you looking down my shirt. I can't believe you did that. You must think I'm one of your little Hollywood tarts. Well, I'm not. And until we're married, I'll thank you to keep your hands to yourself. Now go to bed, you naughty Ned. No more kisses for you.
I don't know why he's gone to live in America. I do know that he likes all the kind of music that I like, that early sort of 50s pop music. You know, like people like Dion, and I used to sing all these, Johnny Tillotson and all that sort of stuff. And used to sing all that stuff together. And I think it's something, maybe he's kind of fascinated by that part of American culture and its sleaziness.
Oh, I can't stay mad at you.
In early 2002, the New Musical Express decided to name the most important band of the last 50 years. The winner was the Smiths.
Well, I mean, that's how you sell newspapers, you know. You get that sort of thing all the time, but then you're having to make comparative judgments, which really can't be made, and you end up saying, you know, Tuesday's better than a piece of string, you know what I mean? And it's bollocks, basically, isn't it?
It begs the question whether the Smiths were the most important group of the past 50 years, and I think quite clearly they weren't. I don't think they were as important as the Beatles, and, you know, I don't think there's many people that would reasonably suggest that they were. But as far as indie music is concerned, and as far as possibly anything since 1982, 3, 4 is concerned, they certainly have a case, and certainly in Britain, yeah, for sure.
The Smiths' career only lasted 5 years, yet 20 years on, we're still talking about them. There's never been any question of them reforming. It could never happen. Perhaps it should never happen.
I'm not too sure whether I want to be on the stage with the Smiths now. With Morrissey 42, 3, whatever he is, and me 39, and Andy and Johnny 38. I think it was then, it was a time that we, in 1982, we met, and we had a hit single, and we brought out an album, and we did some tours, and then we split.
Life as a Smith could play hideous tricks on your brain. But what about life after the Smiths? Johnny Marr became a guitar gunslinger after the Smiths split. He's worked with The Pretenders, Electronic, The, and Oasis. Next year, he's launching his own band, The Healers. Andy Rourke is currently working with a badly drawn boy.
I'm in like 4 bands and never been busier. I'm playing with Badly Drawn Boy. You know, we're doing like a mini world tour, which will take me through till probably January, February. And I've got a band called Guilo with Matt Wardle and Robin File, who are the guitarist and the keyboard player, with Badly Drawn Boy. And that's something I'm really excited about. It's really good stuff. And Mike also plays the drums in that.
Andy's replacement, Craig Gannon, is also still involved in music.
The last 3 or 4 years, I've sort of fulfilled my lifetime ambition of writing music for television. Adverts and the odd drama, a lot of documentaries, mostly for Granada TV. So that's the real thing that, you know, I'm sort of going towards, really. That's where my future lies, in the, you know, in music, really. But I still love playing guitar, still love combing my hair.
Drummer Mike Joyce is now working with Bonehead from Oasis and is still pursuing Morrissey through the courts.
The fact of the matter is that the money that's owed to me at the moment from Morrissey is refusing to pay on the grounds that he's resident in the US, and the jurisdiction of the court, from the court order that was served in Great Britain, doesn't apply to him.
Stephen Patrick Morrissey, born in Davyhulme, West Manchester in 1959, now lives in Los Angeles in a house built by Clark Gable. He rarely, if ever, gives interviews.
Take me out tonight. Take me home.
You people here may have heard it all